People often ask me why I chose Salerno, and more specifically, why I chose southern Italy at all. And there's almost always this expectation that I'll answer with something structured and considered, that I weighed up every option carefully, put cities in a spreadsheet, and arrived at Salerno through some kind of logical process that I can walk them through step by step. And I understand why people expect that, because when you're planning something as significant as moving to another country, you want a framework. You want evidence that someone else did it methodically and, most importantly, that it worked out. But the honest answer is that's not how it happened for me. And I think the more interesting conversation, the one that actually helps people, is about what happened instead. Italy is a genuinely unique country to try to understand from the outside, because on paper it presents itself as one unified place with one flag, one currency, a shared history, and a set of traditions that feel familiar even to people who've never visited. But the moment you start spending real time in Italy, you realise that this unified experience doesn't really exist. The north and the south don't just look different, they feel different in ways that are harder to articulate. The pace, the warmth, the relationship people have with time, with food, with strangers, and really the list does go on. And because of that, yes, you absolutely should research. You should visit different regions if you can, understand which areas align with the life you're trying to build, and be honest with yourself about your non-negotiables. But there's a layer underneath all of that research that most people don't talk about, and it's the layer I think matters most. Intuition. It sounds like a soft word, maybe even an irresponsible one, when you're talking about uprooting your life and moving abroad. But I don't mean it in a vague, airy way. What I mean is that there is a kind of knowing that sits beneath logic, beneath pros and cons lists, beneath what makes sense on paper. And for most people, it's also the thing they've been trained their whole lives to ignore. Intuition isn't efficient. It doesn't present itself clearly or conveniently. It's quiet and it's often completely irrational. And it also has a habit of pointing you toward the thing that would be genuinely right for you, rather than the thing that looks most impressive or most sensible from the outside. And I think that distinction between what's right for you and what looks right is at the heart of every good or bad decision I've ever made about where I live. When I first came to Italy in 2017, I visited an area near Salerno, and something in me shifted almost immediately. I've got to be careful how I describe this, because it's very easy to make it sound like it was a romantic film moment, but it really wasn't. Because it wasn't dramatic and it wasn't this overwhelming wave of emotion. It was a lot more subtle than that. It was more like a recognition than a revelation. Something in me went, I could actually live here. And that was confusing, because on every external metric, southern Italy should have felt completely alien to me. I grew up in London, a fast, layered, intensely global city where the pace of life is something you either adapt to or exhaust yourself fighting against. Southern Italy was the opposite of that in almost every way. Slower, grittier, warmer, less concerned with performance or productivity. And yet instead of that difference feeling like a barrier, it almost felt like relief. The real turning point came when I spent 4 weeks in Salerno on a workaway placement, living with an Italian family and being integrated into the texture of everyday life there, not as a tourist passing through, but as someone actually trying to exist in that rhythm. And I remember thinking quite clearly at some point during those 4 weeks, I feel comfortable here. Not comfortable in the sense that everything was easy or familiar. A lot of it wasn't. But comfortable in the deeper sense of feeling like myself. Like I wasn't managing myself to fit the environment, but the environment was somehow fitting me. That feeling is not something I arrive at easily. As I'm sure most of you know by now, I'm not someone who romanticizes places or settles into them without at least a little bit of friction. So when it happened, I took it seriously. And I made the decision, despite all the ways it didn't add up logically, to listen to it. Nearly 8 years later, I can say without hesitation that spending my first 4 years in Italy in Salerno was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Not because Salerno is perfect, but because it was the right place for who I was at that stage of my life. And I wouldn't have understood that purely through research. Since then, I've continued to follow that same instinct. I left Salerno to move to Palermo when something in me felt ready to expand and to experience a different kind of Southern Italian energy, something rawer and more complex. And then I found myself returning to the Salerno province, where it started to feel like home again, in a way that Palermo, for all its brilliance, never quite did. None of those moves were strategic. There was no 5-year plan being executed. Each one was a response to an internal signal, a shift in what I needed, what the next chapter of my life was asking of me. And each one shaped me in ways I couldn't have planned for or anticipated. Southern Italy represents something specific and profound to me that I find quite difficult to articulate at times without it sounding like a cliche. But I'll try because I really do think it matters. Southern Italy represents warmth, but warmth in a very human, unpolished sense. It's vulnerability without apology. It's grit and beauty existing in the same breath. It's a relationship with life that prioritizes presence and pleasure and connection over productivity and performance. And for someone who grew up in an environment where worth was often measured by output, that was both challenging and deeply necessary. Would northern or central Italy suit me better on paper? Almost certainly. The infrastructure is easier, the bureaucracy maybe can be a bit better organised, the systems tend to work more reliably. If I were advising someone purely on practicalities, I'd probably point them there. But we're not meant to live on paper. We are meant to live in the actual texture of a place, in its lights, its sounds, its rhythms, its people. And the texture of Southern Italy is one that has consistently felt like mine. I think the thing worth sitting with, if you're in the process of researching where to move in Italy, is that you are not choosing a place forever. You are choosing a chapter, and different chapters ask different things of you. A place that would have overwhelmed you 5 years ago might be exactly right for you now. A place that felt like home in your 30s might not feel that way in your 40s. And that's not failure, that's growth. We are allowed to change, and the places we need are allowed to change with us. So yes, research the regions, define your non-negotiables, visit if at all possible. Understand the practical realities of wherever you're considering. All of that matters enormously and will save you a lot of pain. But alongside all of that practical groundwork, ask yourself the question that doesn't appear on any checklist. Where do I feel something? Where does some quieter part of me feel still or become alive? And can I trust that signal enough to act on it? I want to be honest with you about something because I think it's the piece of advice that gets left out of most Italy relocation content. Italy is not an easy country to live in. It is a profoundly rewarding one, but it's not easy, and the distinction between those two things matters. The bureaucracy, yes, I'm talking about it again because it can be genuinely exhausting. The systems don't always work the way you expect them to. Things move slowly and then suddenly or urgently at one time. There will be days, weeks sometimes, where the friction of daily life in Italy tests your patience in ways that are hard to describe until you've lived through them. And what I have observed consistently over the years I've spent here and the number of people I've spoken to who have made this move, if you choose a place purely because it makes practical sense, but it doesn't actually resonate with you at a deeper level, the challenges will start to become unbearable because there's nothing pulling you through them. Whereas if you're somewhere that genuinely fits who you are, that meets something real in you, you will navigate those same challenges with completely different resources. The frustrations become part of the texture of a life you chose for real reasons, rather than obstacles in a life that never quite felt like yours anyway. Salerno for me remains one of the places I most often recommend to people when they're planning a move to Italy, particularly as a first base. For someone who wants to experience southern Italian life without the full intensity of bigger cities such as Naples, which, although Naples can be extraordinary, it can also be genuinely overwhelming when you're still finding your footing in this country. Salerno is a city that's well connected, both to the rest of Italy and also to the wider region, with the Amalfi Coast on its doorstep and places like Cilento not a million miles away. It still has a strong sense of authentic Italian daily life that hasn't been eroded by tourism yet, in the way that many comparable cities have been. And it's got a kind of quiet ambition to it. There's investment coming into the city, the infrastructure is evolving, and there's a huge stadium rebuild underway that makes Salerno feel like a city with somewhere to go, rather than one that's standing still. It's not perfect though, because no Italian city is, and I wouldn't trust anyone who tells you otherwise. Salerno's changed over the years I've known it, as every living place does, and that change brings both beauty and difficulty. But it's real, and it's generous in the ways that matter most. When I sit here now, living back in the Salerno province, I find myself thinking about this question that people often ask: why did I choose Salerno? And I'm not sure that choose is even the right word for what happened. I made a decision, yes, but the decision was really just me agreeing to something that had already been decided somewhere deeper. I followed a signal I didn't fully understand at the time into a place that had no obvious claim on me, and it turned out to be one of the most defining things I've ever done. I don't feel like I chose Salerno. I feel like it chose me. And sometimes that's the real answer that people aren't expecting. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't a detailed plan. It was just the quiet, sometimes inconvenient, completely irrational feeling of, this is mine. If this video has landed with you, if something in it has articulated a feeling you've been carrying around but you haven't had the language for, then I want to tell you about somewhere I've built specifically for people at exactly this stage. The Aperitivo Lounge is my private online community for people who are seriously considering a move to Italy, or who are already in the process of making it happen. It's not a course, it's not a program with a fixed curriculum, it's a living, ongoing conversation, a space where you can ask the real questions, get honest answers, and connect with other people who are navigating the same complexity you are. Because here's what I've found: the research and the logistics, as important as they are rarely where people get stuck. What people actually need is a community of people who understand what it genuinely feels like to be in this process, who have sat with the same uncertainty, asked the same questions at 2 a.m, and ultimately come out the other side. That's what the Aperitivo Lounge is, a space that meets you where you are, whether you're still dreaming, actively planning, or you're already on the ground in Italy trying to work out what comes next. I'll put a link to the community up here or also below in the show notes, but I'd love to welcome you into this space, and also I'd love to know where you are in your Italy journey. So comment below on this video and let me know. I will see you in the next video.